You are sitting in my chair. Or more likely in the parable Jesus tells, you are sitting in his chair, move down. Each one of our readings this morning addresses the issue of false pride, of competition, complacency, and the importance of humility as hallmarks of community. The apocryphal book of Sirach, also known as Ecclesiasticus, not Ecclesiastes, speaks first. Of the readings, Sirach is the grimmest. For the beginning of pride is sin, and the one who clings to it pours out abominations. Therefore, the Lord brings down upon them unheard of calamities and destroys them completely. That's direct and distinctly horrifying. No one escapes, it seems. The one, the mighty, the many, whole nations destroyed, the memories of them erased, obliteration. And then, pride was not created for human beings, or violent anger for those born of women. Psalm 112 takes the opposite approach, celebrating the righteous behavior of those who fear the Lord. Now, what kind of people are those who fear the Lord? They are merciful and full of compassion, generous in lending. They manage their affairs with justice. They have given freely to the poor. They hold up their heads with honor, not with pride in their own power. Unlike those in Sirach, whose memory is erased from the earth, the righteous will be kept in everlasting remembrance. Now, the letter to the Hebrews continues its emphasis on living as a community of pilgrims. That is what Hebrews has been talking to us over and over again in the past several weeks. The behavior emphasized in Psalm 112 is emphasized here as well. Let mutual love continue. Mutual love is brotherly love, sisterly love, care and concern for each other as a community. Let mutual love continue, but do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. Biblical scholar Robert Jewett translates hospitality to strangers as stranger love. So there's mutual love and stranger love in this passage. Stranger love is more than a welcome and an invitation to come into the gathered community. Stranger love looks outward, not just wanting to welcome someone who comes to us, but traveling out into the world around us and inviting people in. We show stranger love best by going out to meet those strangers rather than hoping that they'll show up. That means that we must focus less on ourselves and on the nice space, safe space that we want to rest in, especially now that we've been so much in upheaval. We need to focus less on our nice, safe space than on the needs of the strangers outside our red doors. The Hebrews to whom this letter is addressed are surrounded by secular culture, a pagan culture with a multiplicity of gods and a collection of elaborate rituals involving special foods and complicated prayers so that they can control their environment. In addition, a Gnostic heresy has developed among others, among them and also among some of the Jewish Christians who are supposed to be part of the letter to the Hebrews community, the Jewish Christian community in this part of the world. Their near neighbors following this Gnosticism and their own following Gnosticism, those are temptations to them because the church is struggling. It's a stranger in a group of people, and it is having to work hard to get along with each other and to deal with the people outside it. And what Gnosticism does is offer a hierarchy of secret knowledge for those closest to God. If they just concentrate and pray and spend time with each other or alone with God, they'll develop secret knowledge, which will give them superiority over their neighbors, but also over the other people in the church. Seeking secret knowledge for oneself means that one can step out of the struggle that everybody else is in and avoid the hard work of living in a community of pilgrims, people who follow Jesus without a clear sense of what might happen next and what they need to do about it. Gnosticism and the many opportunities in the pagan Roman world to control the future with ritual and altars tempted and challenged the church in two ways. First, it's always tempting to embrace the behaviors and attitudes of our near neighbors. If we can do that, we will fit in. Any young person who's ever gone to school recognizes this temptation. It's even stronger if you do what I did many times and move a lot. Then it's really a temptation to be able to fit in somehow as fast as you can. If we can do that, we will fit in. We will be accepted, not necessarily for who we are at heart, but for who we are to those we want to join. In the time of writing this letter, fitting into the pagan culture was not only easier than being a Jewish Christian, but physically safer. Modern theologians and biblical scholars tell us, and have been telling us for at least 3 decades now, that the world outside our doors is more similar to the world of the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era than to any time in the past 1,700 years. 1,700 years ago or so, in 325, almost 1,800 years, Constantine signed the Edict of Milan and made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, that happened after this letter to the Hebrews was written, at least 150 years after, maybe almost 200 years after. But for us in our day and time, we have enjoyed being part of the superior culture for all that time. The second temptation is more subtle. I mean, we didn't have to fit in because we were the people with whom everyone else was supposed to fit in. The second temptation to the church in the time of the Hebrews and also now, the second temptation is more subtle, and it is still with us 2,000 years into our being. That lure is to focus on our own rituals in our own space and close the doors to the culture around us. We follow Jesus, but only up to a point. We forget that following Jesus means that we are sent. The Christian community is an apostolic community intended to be out in that pagan world, demonstrating who Jesus was and is by what we do and are. It is much more comfortable to stay put. Both the letter to the Hebrews and the parable Jesus tells in the name of the Pharisee, in the home of the Pharisee, describe ethical behavior, good rules for living in a group and for being guests and hosts at banquets, but they go much further than ethics or etiquette, or they go much further than etiquette and into ethics as our understanding of a way of being. They move the heavens, they move the hearers and us in the 21st century church away from our comfortable assumptions about who we are and what our place is in this world to a confrontation with those assumptions and a radical recognition that our job is not to claim our chair either as host or guest and hold on to it, but to get up and offer it to someone else. Not only does the guest have to be removed by the host and sent down to a much lower space in the room to a much less prestigious seat, but also Jesus challenges the host and says, when you give a party, don't give it for the people that can repay you. Don't give it for the people who can invite you to an equally big or bigger party. Give it for the people who can't repay you. And those are the strangers outside the door that nobody wants to have anything to do with. But we can also see this in a less dramatic and less far away way. Doesn't have to be a big party at a big person's house, an important person's house. I've been told this story several times, and I have my own version of it as well. But I don't know, several years ago, two of our parishioners were visiting another state and another town, and they went to an Episcopal church, which happened to be within walking distance from where they were staying. And there was nobody at the door to greet them, but the bulletins were lying there. So they picked up a bulletin and they walked in, and there was nobody inside the church at the time, except a couple of people. So they chose two seats, and they knelt down and prayed, and then they sat and they waited for the service to start. And people started coming in, and an usher eventually appeared. But what happened most was that a couple came up to them and said, instead of saying good morning, which is what this couple was about to say, the couple who came up to them said, "Excuse me, but you're sitting in our seats." And it's funny, but the people that I'm talking about have visited that town several times, and they have never gone back to that church. So that's, we get comfortable in our pews and in our places, and we don't even think about how saying something like that drives not only people who've never been in the church away, but people who are staunch members and regular worshipers. They'll never go back to that particular place either. How do we look at the space that we're in? Is it ours? Is it ours for us? Is it God's? Are we God's hosts in God's house? And is it not only for us to share, but go out and invite people in? Well, that's a rhetorical question, because the answer Jesus gives is it's absolutely for you to go out and invite other people in. And in fact, go out to where the people are and in time invite them in, but in the meantime, work with them where they are. The people who followed Jesus, the people whom Jesus sought out and healed and taught, were on the fringes of the society in which they lived. They were unclean, they were poor, uneducated, outcast in one way or another, or simply just not very important. They were simply ignored by the people in power. Power and position were defined by rules that helped small groups and larger society function, but the rules themselves had become the purposes of the group for which they had been made. We confuse that sometimes still, just as the people in the time of Jesus confused that, and the people in the early centuries of the church. The rules are intended to help us include people, not exclude people. They help us recognize how to treat each other, not ignore each other. And when we focus all the times on the rules, that's my seat you're sitting in, I always sit there because that's what I do. That's an unwritten rule. It's a huge assumption, and it drives people right out. Next week, the purpose of the Christian community is to show Jesus to the world. We do that by making our circle wider and wider, not closing it to keep those people, whoever they are, out. At the same time, it behooves us to do what Rob Graham was talking about earlier, that within the community, inviting whoever is here and whoever wants to come, we put ourselves into small groups to learn more about each other, to share each other's story. But again, not with the ultimate purpose of just staying in that group. The ultimate purpose is to go out as a person who knows not only his or her story of the Christian community, but also other people's, and also is able to meet people out of here with that vulnerability that Jesus shows all the time, and that's necessary for truly being the Christian community. Next week, we will return to 2 services. Next week, we will bring the prayer books and the hymnals back into the pews. Next week, does that mean we are finally going back to the way things were? I'm sorry to tell you that it does not. We cannot go back. We are an apostolic pilgrim community, the church, like the people in the time of Jesus, like the people in the early church. We no longer have a clear path. The clearest thing about our path is the person of Jesus. But we need to go where he leads, and where he leads is not a place, is out through the world. Ultimately, we have citizenship. We currently have citizenship in heaven. We have dual citizenship in heaven and here in the world. And we don't get to build that city that is talked about in the book of Revelation. That city is going to come down from heaven, and we are going to go up to it. We have to go forward without seeing that and without knowing exactly how our path goes, so that in our response to Jesus, we build that bridge as we go. That's not easy. It is much easier just to say, okay, we've built this space, let's stay here. But that's not what we're called to do. We're called to go out of this space and bring other people in, and then go out again. I mentioned last week, okay, we are here to be the church, to serve God in the 21st century, in the community of St. Charles, Missouri, in this place and in this time. I mentioned last week that most of our structure as a parish church has been challenged and turned upside down over the past 2.5 years, not only by the pandemic, but also by our risk-taking in renovating this building and spending money that would have been nice, perhaps, and perhaps more prudent to hold in reserve. But we took a risk that this congregation has been taking over and over again for the past 186 years. I don't know how many of you have heard this story, but apparently before this building was built, the church, which was meeting at Clark and Benton Streets and had been doing so for 90 years, was debating whether they needed to close or move. So they took the risk and they moved. They didn't have the money to do that. The money came to them. They had to work at that, and they had to build the path they were on as they were on it. That's what we continue to do. That's a hallmark of the Christian community: inclusivity, flexibility, and enthusiasm, joy, curiosity about what's coming next. We could sit here and say, oh, we don't know what we're going to do about stewardship. We don't know what we're going to do about Sunday school. We don't know what we're going to do about any of these things. Well, that's true. We don't. But that gives us an opportunity to really pray about it and think about it and try new things. I think one of the first things that you might consider is the small group ministries, the small groups. Those would be a good, safe place in which you can grow and then move forward. It's a place that we can start thinking outside the box and outside the building. Amen.